Is Shimano CUES 9, 10, or 11 speed compatible? How does it shift? Can you mix it with other components? A couple of weeks ago, I set up my Rivendell back here in a 2x mullet shifting setup to help answer these questions. First off, I wanted to test the viability of having a friction front derailleur and a index clicky rear derailleur. How does that work? Secondly, I wanted to get a sense of the general shifting performance of Shimano CUES. And lastly, I wanted a peek into our drivetrain future, since for all practical purposes, CUES is going to replace so much of that middle to low end component groups in the Shimano line. If you don't know what I mean, CUES is set to replace group sets like Claris, Sora, Tiagra, and in the flat bar realm, it's going to replace things like Altus, Acera, and Dior. So Shimano is getting rid of all of those systems and replacing it with CUES. So I thought it would be something that we should start getting used to here. CUES is going to come in 9, 10, and 11 speed, but they're all going to use the same 11 speed chain. This isn't anything groundbreaking. It's what I've been doing on all my hack videos if you've watched throughout the years. I'll regularly mix 9 and 10 and 11 speed components, and it's all unified with an 11 speed chain. If anything, this is Shimano just kind of affirming the fact that I was on the right track. So what this means practically is, let's say, you have a 10 speed cassette and a 10 speed shifter on your bike, like I do here with the Rivendell. If you wanted to update it to 11 speed, you clearly have to update the cassette to get that extra cog and the shifter, but you won't have to replace the rear derailleur, which is kind of huge in some ways. Since the 9, 10, and 11 speed derailleurs all use the same cable pull. And like we know on this channel, because I try to articulate it a lot, is that rear derailleurs are pretty dumb. They don't know how many speeds they have. What dictates the number of speeds in a drivetrain system is typically the shifter. This to me is probably one of the best aspects of CUES, is you don't have to replace absolutely everything, just the shifter and the cassette, but the derailleur can stay the same. Why they couldn't have implemented this thinking earlier, like decades earlier, money. 1, 2, 3. Hey there everybody, Future Us here in the editing bay. Just a quick note that this video is completely unsponsored. We bought the CUES stuff you see in this video with our own money. And if you guys appreciate that, please consider supporting the channel by joining us on Patreon or picking up some stickers. We a lot of times lose money on videos once you factor in time and cost and expense and all that stuff. And it's really the folks that support the channel on Patreon that make this like a viable thing to do. So if you appreciate our take on bike stuff, you know what to do. Let's get back to the video. First, I want to tackle this notion of a shifting mullet setup. So friction shifter in the front and index in the rear. One of the biggest complaints about 2X is the chain rub on the front derailleur. And in my opinion, this problem can be eliminated by just running friction on the front derailleur. If you think about it, it gives you infinite trim rather than locking it into 2 or 3 index positions. It just makes more sense to have it friction. A lot of the old folks in the back are already typing on their keyboards. This is how it used to be. Apparently early days of grip shift functioned similar with clicky on the rear and friction in the front. Someone had also commented that early campy drifters were the same, which I think is pretty cool. I didn't know that. If that's true or not true, let me know in the comments below. Another issue a lot of people bring up with 2x is the constant need to jump back and forth between the big ring and the small ring. I think this is only a problem if you stay within the realms of the recommended chainring combinations. As you guys know, I like to set mine up in a wide range double. So a very distinct big ring and a very distinct small ring. On this bike, I have it set up with 40-24, and I am in that 40-tooth chain ring about 95-98% of the time, and only drop into the smaller ring when going on a really steep climb or a section with lots of extended climbing. When it's set up like this, this eliminates virtually that back and forth. You're basically running like a 1x, a 40-tooth 1x, but you have an extremely low bailout gear, way lower than you could get even if you're running a 50-tooth cassette in the rear. So for me, this friction front, index rear worked awesome. I was able to get the gearing ratios I wanted in the front and had the relative convenience of index shifting in the rear. Again, I have no problem using friction in the rear. This is more just for the sake of other people. I want to give you guys the confidence and the ammunition to do something weird. Like if you want to run a double but aren't happy with the chainring combos, or you do want to get rid of the chain rub, just run it friction. It's okay. Before I get into how it shifts, we have to talk about one of the essential things about CUES, and that is this whole Linkglide technology, which is housed mostly in the cassette. So Shimano has Hyperglide cassettes, which emphasize crisp, quick shifting and moderate to light weights. Linkglide, on the other hand, was developed specifically with e-bikes, e-mountain bikes in mind, which apparently eat cassettes for breakfast. So Linkglide prioritizes durability, longevity, the ability to handle really ugly shifts under high torque that you can do with e-mountain bikes. In a lot of ways, this makes for a really good bike packing or touring cassette, right? It's not super fragile. It leans heavy into the durability. They accomplish this by kind of thickening and making the teeth profile a little bit taller from what I understand. So you get that durability at the expense of weight and to some degree, some shifting performance. That is Linkglide in a nutshell, and that's what CUES is going to be, kind of built around. But to my thinking, I think you can still use Hyperglide cassettes with the CUES system. Everything I've seen suggests that it's compatible, so you can mix and match that. Speaking of mixing and matching, let's dive into my drivetrain specifically so you can see how I've cobbled together a drivetrain here. For the front shifter, I'm running a Rivendell right-hand shifter flipped upside down and put on the left-hand side to give you an under-the-thumb friction shifter. That's connected to a Sub-C front derailleur by IRD, which is a rebranded microshift shifter or front derailleur that they don't make anymore. As the name suggests, Sub-C is for subcompact, so perfect for these smaller chainring combinations. For the crankset, I'm using the Dixna LeCrank crankset from Alex Cycles, and it's pretty cool because it's got the old school BCD, so 110/74. You can run a really wide variety of chainring sizes, but it's a Shimano Holotech type crank, so external bottom bracket, and wait, there's more. It comes in really short lengths. So this is a 162.5, and they make them from 170 to 135 in 2.5 millimeter increments. And wait, there's more. It does not break the bank. I've been running this now for close to a year, no problems whatsoever, and definitely my pick for sleeper crank. On the rear of the bike, I've got a CUES Linkglide 10-speed cassette. This is the 11-39. So I'm running 11-39 rear, 40-24 in the front. Shifts great. I've got a Linkglide rear derailleur. This is on the box it said 10/11 speed, the 2x specific one, but like we talked about, this should also work with 9 speed. I don't know why they don't just mark 9, 10, and 11. And I should mention also the chain rings on the crankset are 9-speed specific ones. And lastly, the chain is an 11-speed Connex chain. So not Linkglide specific, and it still works. I mean, there could be some marginal benefits, improvements to shifting by using a Linkglide specific chain. But to my understanding and my experience, you can use any 11-speed chain and it will work with the system. Okay, that's a lot of stats. So after 2 weeks of riding and about 100 miles on the bike, doing some gravel rides and just some in-town commuting, how does it shift? To me, it's just perfectly fine. I love this combination of friction front, index rear. When I compare it back to back with the Dior shifters on the Omnium, those definitely felt a lot lighter to actuate and a little bit crisper shifting. That's not to say that the CUES stuff is bad, but when you compare it to something nicer, you do start to differentiate a little bit. We're really getting into the weeds here. If all you rode was CUES and had no frame of reference, you'd be perfectly happy. Let's just put it out there. The shifting is good. I find it definitely shifts into the lower gears faster and quicker for me. And getting to the harder gears, there is like a little bit of hesitation. Unless I do a quick double shift, then it tends to move a little bit quicker. So in terms of general shifting performance, good enough. perfectly adequate. Unless you're racing in the highest ends of the sport and need super precise shifting instantaneously, you're not going to know this. I think the trade-off for durability versus shifting performance in this instance is perfectly justified. So there you go, TLDW. Good but not great, but good enough. That should be the tagline. So as you can see, there's a lot of good that comes with CUES, you know, the compatibility, the durability. What is the ugly, as my thumbnail may or may not suggest, depending on how I feel? The first thing is that CUES is going to be a huge departure in terms of compatibility with all the legacy group sets. Basically, there will be a BC/AC divide before CUES and after CUES. For example, CUES will not work with any existing Sora because the cable pull is different. It uses a cable pull that is closer to 1-to-1, not exactly 1-to-1, so please don't ask if it works with SRAM exact actuation because I haven't tested it. And it's not necessarily exactly 1-to-1, but close to. Just like when people say older Shimano stuff is 2-to-1, it's actually, you know, 1.7. So again, it's good in that in the future, you know, within the CUES range, it's going to be compatibility, but it's bad in that in the past, BC, all those legacy components are not going to be compatible with the new stuff. So we're talking decades and literally millions of units rendered no longer compatible, at least with CUES. For some, this isn't a big deal, but for me, as someone who got into bikes because it was a sustainable form of transportation, it just bums me out. I mean, I get why Shimano is doing it, but at the same time, you know, literally millions of units of drivetrain is not going to be compatible moving forward. Okay, so what else is ugly? It's hard not to talk about CUES and talk about the aesthetics a little bit. Like I mentioned, you know, the Linkglide stuff was developed with mountain biking in mind, and the kind of angular and brutalist look of Shimano CUES definitely makes it fit well on those types of bikes. But when you put it on the Riv, I think it cries a little bit. I can see Grant Peterson crying in the corner already. You know, it's big, it's chunky, it's angular. It looks like, you know, a cyber truck drove by and dropped a turd and left it on your bike. So not to my personal taste. You could say, well, just, you know, make it silver and it'll be much better. Kind of, but that still doesn't fix how big and overbuilt it looks. You know, when you compare it to, you know, the more svelte and sculptural in the nice, smooth, pleasing way derailleurs were made, this is not it. I mean, if you're into kind of the brutalist Cybertruck vibes, then you'll be happy. But for the rest of us, you know, classicists or people that like the look of svelte classic bikes, it hurts the eyes. This is going to be the drivetrain future of you know, a lot of people's experiences, because again, it's going to replace a lot of those middle to lower tier Shimano lines. It's going to flatten them all. No more Sora, Claris, Tiagra, Dior, Acera, Altus. It's just CUES, for better or for worse. I'm going to talk about drop bars really quickly. It's rumored that CUES will get, you know, curly bar shifters sometime in the future. They haven't released photos or anything yet, but I will say you can use it today with drop bar shifters if you're willing to go friction. The Uno shifter that we worked with Mary Sales, you know, again, it's got that bigger barrel, that longer lever, and it's like that, so it will work with these modern rear derailleurs. And you could use CUES now with a drop bar shifter if you got our Uno shifter. You could also use it now if you use a microshift shifter. You could use it now with the Gavinal shifter if you use you know, one of the 11 or 12 speed microshift shifters and ran that friction. You could also use it now with drop bars if you use the Diacomp thummies with, again, the larger cable pull that Laura has on her bike. There are options you can do today if you're willing to go friction. So what do you think of CUES? Do you guys have any other questions? Leave those in the comments below. If you guys learned something new, were entertained, please consider supporting the channel by joining us on Patreon. That's the best way to do it. This is not a sponsored video. Probably gonna lose money on this video depending on the views. So if you found the content helpful, you know, join us on Patreon, pick up some merch, and keep the supple side down.